Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of React Roundup. I'm here live at Microsoft Ignite with Donovan Brown. Donovan, do you want to say hi?
Hi, everyone.
Hey, folks, I just want to let you know quickly about Netlify. Netlify is a really cool system for hosting what are traditionally known as static sites. However, the real benefit that I've been finding is that I don't have to mess with the back end. I can just set things up. I build the website out. I've been using a system called 11DJS, and you just deploy it. And then anything that you have that you want to do, you can do on the front end. So if you want to pull in some kind of database with Firebase or something else, if you want to collect form data, Netlify provides all kinds of services that make it easy to do all that stuff. If you're trying to do serverless, they have a really, really neat serverless setup that will allow you to deploy your websites without having to deploy a backend, and it'll do some of the work for you. I just love it. So if you're looking for a way that you can actually deploy a website that only has front-end technology in it, gives you all the tools that you typically need for the back end without having to actually program the back end, then give them a try. Go check them out at netlify.com.
Nice to be here again. Actually, I think the last time we spoke, we were at Ignite together.
Yeah, I think so.
I forget. Was that in? It was here last year.
It was Atlanta.
It was Atlanta. Wow, that was a long time ago.
Yeah, 2 years ago.
Wow. Nice to be back.
Yeah, definitely. So you're kind of the DevOps guy. In fact, when I think of DevOps, I'm either thinking of you or I have a couple of friends that work for Chef.
Gotcha. Fair enough. Cool.
And so,
cool.
Yeah, so that's usually where this comes in. And it's interesting. You gave a technical keynote earlier in the conference and talked a little bit about Azure DevOps.
Correct.
I think last time we were on the show, we were talking more about just DevOps in general.
Right.
You know, so it's people, processes,
and products.
And products, right?
Yeah.
And just the ideas and philosophies around
Correct.
DevOps. But it looks like Microsoft is taking that up to the next level where they actually have a product that focuses on DevOps. And just to give you a little bit of an idea, I've been thinking a lot about what I want to do with the podcasts. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I'm really focused on is developer freedom, right? It's freedom to work on what we want.
Yep.
It's freedom to do the things that we really care about. It's freedom to work where we want. And usually that then parlays into things that we don't want to do, like fix stupid bugs that we missed because we don't have CI/CD,
Right.
Or some folks don't want to do deployments or think about some of these other things that
Sure.
DevOps traditionally encompasses.
Sure.
So how does Microsoft DevOps or Azure DevOps give people the option to choose what they want to do and kind of have that freedom that we're talking about?
Interesting. The way that you put that is like, I don't want to do deployments because it's just something that distracts me. I think that's an okay thing to say, because what you should have done is automated it, so it's not something that you do.
100%.
Right? But the deployment will happen. It needs to happen. You can't say, I don't want to deploy my code, so why are you writing it?
Right.
You do want to deploy it. You don't want to manually
I don't want to think about it.
Exactly. You want to be able to commit code to a repository and it magically make its way into the environments of my choice. And that's exactly what we want to be able to do with Azure DevOps is we want to automate as much as we possibly can. So as a developer, you don't even know all this magical stuff is happening. Mm-hmm. I tell everybody, if your developer has to do anything more than commit code to a repository to get it into production, you still have work to do.
100%.
Because as a developer, that's all I want to do. I want to commit code, grab another task, kill it, commit code. Let's keep on rinsing and repeating. And what I'll notice is minutes, hopefully not even hours later, someone's tweeting about how awesome this new feature is that just got deployed, right? And I didn't have to do anything about it. That's our goal. And we have the power to do that for any language and any platform. Because it was interesting when you said, what I want to go with this podcast is do what you want, where you want. And that's exactly what we're trying to do with Azure DevOps.
Yep.
Code in any language you want and deploy to any platform you want. We simply do not care.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I think I've talked to a number of people about Visual Studio Team Services, and you mentioned that
it's been rebranded.
Right, to Azure DevOps.
Correct.
But when I think of Visual Studio Team Services, usually I'm thinking of things like Git repositories and stories, tickets, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. All still there.
CI/CD.
Yep.
So what's changed?
Great. So what's changed is obviously the branding changed, right? So we found that a lot of people had an allergic reaction to the word Visual Studio. For right or for wrong, I'm obviously a huge Visual Studio fan.
Right.
But if you know the history of Visual Studio and you're a Java developer, to you it's like garlic to a vampire, right? It's like, get that out of my face. Visual Studio is not for me.
Well, and in the JavaScript community, I mean, there are people that have come from sort of the Microsoft background, and so they're like, oh, cool, it's a tool that does stuff for me.
Sure.
And then there are people from the open source background that say Visual Studio is that big bloated thing, Microsoft is that big evil company.
Correct.
And bringing them around to say, hey, look, there's something here that can really help you out. That's rather important.
Yes, and it had been a challenge when we had Visual Studio in the name of the product. Even though, even as VSTS, it still worked for any language and any platform, we just couldn't convince people that it did.
Right.
So what we have noticed that is people have already accepted the fact that Azure will let me run my code no matter what language or platform I want to run it on. So we're like, okay, great. So maybe we need to realign with something that people already associate with being open.
Right.
Which is Azure is an open platform. We run 50% Linux VMs in Azure, right? So that's just staggering. If you want to run Go or Rust or Python or whatever language you want to run, it'll run in Azure.
Yep.
So let's go ahead and kind of attach on to that. Hey, we have a DevOps offering that'll get you into Azure, and stop calling it Visual Studio. Still the same product, right? But now hopefully people are going to have less of an allergic reaction to the fact that it's called Visual Studio. Other things that changed is that we realized that people didn't need all of it. Visual Studio Team Services comes with work item tracking. It comes with test plan management, repositories for Git and centralize. It comes with CI/CD. It also came with package management. I mean, there's just so much inside of it. And if all you cared about was continuous integration and continuous delivery, the navigation could sometimes feel clumsy and confusing because there's so much stuff. I was just joking with the person at the booth just a moment ago where he says, I remember I'd go into VSTS, click on the Git repository, and panic because it's empty. I'm like, where did all my code go? And then, oh, that's right, my code's in GitHub.
It's in GitHub.
Exactly.
Right.
So, but having that button there that you could click, and then your code's not there, you panic. But now we can streamline that and say, hey, if your code is in Git and you don't need our Git repositories, just turn that feature off, and it won't even appear in your navigation.
Oh, nice.
So you don't accidentally click it and then have a heart attack on where's my code. You're like, oh, yeah, my code's in GitHub. It's not a big problem, right?
Or CI/CD's not running.
Exactly, right.
You know, it's Circle
Somewhere
CI
else,
or something,
exactly,
right?
or you're using another system, but I do want to use you for my unlimited private repos. So maybe you're using us for some features, but not others,
right?
And you don't need to now see those features you're not using. And it's just a toggle to turn them on or off. It's really nice. So if you decide, you know what? I need a little bit more power than just an issue in GitHub. I need to be able to see the difference between a bug and a task and a feature, and I want to have different anatomy of those items built into the tool so that I can plan them. You can basically say, you know what? I want to turn on Azure boards, which gives me Kanban boards, task boards, and all the things we just described. And I don't still need your Git repository because I have it in GitHub. So it's kind of nice to be able to fine-tune it and streamline your interface such that you're only looking at the features of it that you need. So that's two things. We rebranded it, and we've separated it apart so that you can actually acquire them in several different ways.
That makes sense. And I think some of the things that we've been talking about, like with deployments and some of the technical aspects of this, lead toward freedom. But one of the things we don't talk a lot about is the process, the process for development, right? I also don't want to think about which of these 10 things do I need to do next. I just need to know, just pull the next one off, right?
Yeah, and the Kanban can help a lot with that, right? And nice agile practices can help a lot with that. And what's really nice is that our work item tracking is more than just a list of issues. It literally has a process driving the work items that you use. So if you are an agile shop, we'll help you set up your iterations, we'll help you set up your backlog, we'll help you prioritize it. These are things that a system that is just a list of tasks isn't going to do for you. And it's really nice, like you said, I don't want to know what I have to think about next. Great, because our process is going to help you guide you and say, hey, look, this is what you want to do next. You want to take that work item, you want to break it down into the task. You want to go and apply estimates to those so that we can help you do capacity planning. You want to visualize them on a Kanban board with a WIP limit that lets you know when you should pull something from one column to the next and that you're not overburdening your team or getting ahead of yourself. So we've actually have all that built into our Azure board feature. And I keep telling people, everything's not an issue. Right? Some things are bugs, some things are tasks, some things are features, some things are epic, some things are product backlog items, and they look and they feel and they act differently. And our system understands that and lets them look and feel and act differently.
That sounds amazing to me.
It's awesome. And it's like I tell people all the time, like you really need to look at our work item tracking. It's brilliant stuff. And we even come out of the box with 3 different templates. So if you are a generalist agile shop, you just want to work in iterations, we actually have a template for that. But if you're like razor sharp Scrum team, that is an agile process, but there's specific rules to running a Scrum team that are slightly different than running an agile team. We have a template that understands that. The templates even change the vocabulary because, again, if you are a Scrum shop, you run in sprints and you work with product backlog items. If you're an Agile team, you run in iterations and you work with user stories. And our tool understands that you said you're Scrum, so I'm going to use the words and the vocabulary that you're going to be familiar with. In my mind, I don't have to do this mapping of, the tool says one thing, but my process says another, and I have to do this mental map. Nope, we get it. And we're going to change our tool to match your vocabulary, which is fantastic as well.
Yeah, that's amazing. The other thing, just talking about the process, so a bug is different from a...
Absolutely.
An issue, and I mean, all of these different things, I've worked on teams, and it all just kind of goes in the same pile.
Oh, it's horrible.
Right? And then, it's, okay, which of these things do I work on next? Well, it turns out that this bug's critical, so I have to work on it next, right?
Sure.
But it got buried in all the other garbage.
Exactly. And what's really interesting about the way that the boards system works inside of Azure DevOps, or what we call Azure Boards, is that particular portion, is that, let's say, for example, you have a bug. One of the things I need to know about a bug are the steps to reproduce that bug. Right. And we actually have a field that's titled Steps to Reproduce. So there's no question about what goes into this particular field. And then it also says, what was your expected result? Because just because you tell me the steps to reproduce, I might not see that as a bug.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I expected it to happen. What did you expect it to do? And that's when I get the clear answer. So we have a field that says, give me the steps to reproduce, and another field that says, what did you expect to see? Right. And then another field completely for priority. So if it's really a priority one critical bug, there is no getting lost in the shuffle anymore.
Right.
Because there's an attribute that says, Donovan, this is critical for us. And if I sort by that column, the important stuff rises to the top. And it's a bug that I want you to go focus on, not a task or a feature or an epic. And if I have a feature, again, the questions I ask you are different. I need you to describe the feature, and then I need you to give me the acceptance criteria, right? Which is completely different than steps to reproduce or what build was it found in.
Right.
So it's really cool that our fields on the items that you create drive you to answer the questions that someone reading that is not you, or even yourself a month from now, can read it and say, yep, I know exactly what I was thinking about, right? So it's really powerful that it's not just an arbitrary text box that you're supposed to fill in and then tag it to death with all these arbitrary tags to try to figure out it's actually a feature and it is important. No, let the anatomy of the item actually drive that for you.
Yep. And I love the example, too. I mean, when I'm looking at features or stories or anything like that, I find that there's nobody dumber than me a month ago.
Exactly. Same thing with source code, right? You're like, I don't need to comment this. This is brilliant. It just speaks to me, this code. A month later, like, what the hell was I thinking?
Exactly.
Same thing happens with a work item. Like, you give it a really crappy title, and you're like, what the hell does this even mean?
Yeah.
But luckily, we have these other attributes that can kind of clue you in. And over time, you just get better at it because you realize, man, I had no idea what I meant from that a month ago. And you start to use the tool better and better.
Yeah, well, and again, back to the example of the feature. I mean, one of the steps in my workflow for a feature is create the user stories.
Absolutely.
Right? And so it's not going to follow the same process as user stories. And I love the idea of, okay, this is in this stage and this is in this stage. And as we work through it, we're going to have a process for getting through everything.
And you also have a hierarchy, right? Because a feature gets broken down into user stories.
Right.
Those user stories get broken down into tasks. Because, and if you continue to break it down that way, you can start to paralyze your team's effort. Too many people say, okay, this is my work item. Yeah, but that work item has a database change, a store procedure change, it has some UI, it has some API. But if you broke it down into those individual tasks, you could be working on the API while I'm doing the database part. And now we're not bottlenecking on this one feature because we've broken it down into parts that we can all go and grab that all roll up to we're achieving this user story that pays back to this particular feature that we're working on.
Right.
And also what's really cool is that we also have test case management.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about defining that acceptance criteria, it's not just words on a page or words in a text field. It's literally test cases that we've written that I'm going to click on this and I expect this to happen. I'm going to click on that and I expect this to happen. And they're actually associated to the work item itself. So the acceptance criteria are actionable tasks that I can take, tests that I can run that verify that when all these tests pass, you finally actually completed the feature to my understanding and our agreed understanding of what that's supposed to be, which is great.
So once you have those tests written, I'm going to change tactics a little bit.
Sure.
Can you just pull that into your CI?
So what ended up happening is those are going to be manual tests at time zero, right?
Okay.
What's really cool is that they're literally just defining your acceptance criteria. So let's say that you and I have this new feature.
So it's instructions for a human being.
Exactly.
Okay.
At stage number one, because you got to remember, sometimes the code doesn't even exist yet. You should be writing your acceptance criteria test cases before you write a single line of code. The reason that I say that
I'm with you.
Yes, is because it's cheaper to change those words than the code if you make it wrong.
Right.
And also, your stakeholders who might not be technical don't want to look at lines of code.
So true.
But what they can do is read step A, do this, step B, do this. And like, that's funny because in my head, I thought step B would be something else. Oh, cool. Let's change this right now.
Let's clarify it.
Exactly. And now we have a better understanding of what the end product is supposed to do because I can see the steps themselves. Now, what I intend my teams to do is write those test cases before they commit to actually doing the work.
Right.
As we start to do the work, they can now go and try to automate those test cases, right? So your answer to your question is yes and no. At time 0, no, you can't just put them in your CI pipeline. They're going to be there to drive the development that my team does. We got so good at coded UI tests at one of my previous teams that step number 1 was to go write the automation to test a feature that didn't even freaking exist yet.
Oh, wow.
We were that good at it because we're like, all right, I know I'm going to define buttons with these IDs because we had a standard. And I could literally say, go click a button with the ID OK because I know that's going to be there. Go click a button with the ID continue on this wizard. And they would literally, we could write the code, run it, and it would fail. And then I would say, okay, great, let's go write a web page and put an OK button on there. And we'd get one step further, and then it would fail. All right, then we're supposed to have a button over here that has continue on it. And then we'd run it again and it'd get one step further and fail. But we literally had our automation written before we had the feature written.
Right.
So we were doing test-driven development of automated testing. It was freaking
awesome.
It was like, holy crap, this is like what you dream of, right? So our automation was done before the feature was done. We had unit tests written already. We had full automation written before we wrote a single line of code. It was awesome.
That's amazing.
And you can do it using all the tools that we're talking about right now for any language, right? Which is also really cool is that it doesn't matter if it's .NET, doesn't matter if it's Java, it could be any language you want. You can go off and use tools like Selenium, you can use tools like Coded UI, and be able to write great unit tests using NUnit or XUnit, and do all your testing up front. At first, it feels mind-numbingly painful, because as a developer, you just want to start creating, you just want to see it come to life. It's when a test fails for the first time that stops a bug getting into production that you see the value in what you're doing up front.
Well, and that comes back to that freedom, right? It's, I fixed this bug 4 times.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Oh
I wish I had CI that would freaking say, you broke it again, dude.
Exactly. What's so funny, I tell people all the time, is like, have you ever played ping pong with yourself? Like, what are you talking about? Like, you've been here, right? Where you get a bug, and you're like, oh, look, that's a weird, interesting bug. And you go and you code a fix for it. And then a month later, you get another bug. It's like, oh, that's an interesting bug. And you go and you fix it. And then 2 weeks later, that original bug comes back. And you don't really realize it's the original bug, but you have this weird deja vu. Like, damn it, I feel like I fixed this bug before. Like, this feels like eerily familiar. So you go and you fix it again. And then 2 weeks later, another bug pops up. Like, damn it, am I in Groundhog Day? I know I fixed this freaking bug, but what you're not realizing is they're related to each other. The change to fix one is breaking the other, but you have no unit test, so you don't know that you're breaking the other one until your customer tries it again. But I tell everybody, instead of doing that, when you get that very first bug assigned to you, do yourself a favor. Stop everything and write a unit test that exploits that bug. First of all, it's going to make you far faster at fixing it. Because if it's a really gnarly scenario that you have to set up every single time you make a code change and then the code change didn't fix it and you got to tear it down and set it all up again and make another random code change and test it again, it's really painful.
Right.
But a unit test you can run really, really fast over and over again. And then you can quickly see, did that fix it? Did that fix it? Great. Now we're a day later. The unit test is in place. The test is passing. That other bug comes. What do? Stop what you're doing. You write a unit test. Now I have 2 unit tests. And I write the code to fix that particular unit test. And I run both unit tests, and the first one fails. I immediately know, holy shit, these things are related to each other. I would have never figured this out. Let me go make a true change that passed both of these test cases. And those 2 bugs will never show up together again. That's the beauty of writing unit tests. But until you see a unit test fail, no one sees the value. So it's just extra code that I wrote, and it always passes. Why am I wasting my time? You're not wasting your time. Because the one time it fails, you're going to be like, thank God I wrote that unit test.
100%.
Cool.
Well, and it's interesting, too. I mean, probably 90% of the unit tests that I write, once I write the code for it, they're just going to keep passing.
Correct.
95% of the time.
Sure.
But the other 5% of the time, it's stuff. It's usually that minute stuff that
never guessed.
Right.
You would have never guessed that was going to be related.
Well, and the other thing is that it's usually the stuff, like I can remember broad strokes of what the code I wrote, right? Sure. But, it'd be easy to fix when I wrote the code, but we're 3 months down the road. I'm on to something else. And so I'm not as familiar with it, and so I have to go refamiliarize myself with it on stuff that I already thought was done, which is frustrating. And it's crazy.
You know what's even funnier than that is that if you're in a time crunch, so let's say, for example, that scenario happens, right? What are you like? Oh, crap, I don't have time to test all this stuff. I don't have unit tests.
When I'm in a time crunch, I'm such a terrible dev.
Exactly. But you're like, okay, I know this code is used in a lot of places. I don't want to risk breaking anything. I'm just going to copy this method and paste it over here and name it something else, and then have this other code call that instead.
I've never done that.
Oh, yes. So now you have twice as many bugs, and you have this legacy, and you don't know like which code is calling this method, which code is, why are they so similar, but that line's different. Can I use it everywhere? Like, just leave it. I'm going to copy and paste it a third time. But had you had
never
unit
done
tests,
that either.
if you had an actual unit test that protected you, you'd be confident to go in there and refactor that method because you're like, you know what? I'm going to go in there and do something radical. If all my tests pass,
it'll
great.
break the use case for the original.
Exactly. But if my tests fail, then I know better, right? But having that safety net, I give the analogy that writing code with unit tests is like walking a tightrope with a net underneath you. If you fall, you're going to giggle, you're going to laugh, you're going to get back up there, and you're going to try again. You don't have any unit tests, you fall off that tightrope, you're a dead man, right? And that's how I feel about it. So it's funny, the older that I get and the more that I program, I feel uncomfortable and uneasy if I write code and don't write tests. It's like driving in a car with no seatbelt. I just don't feel comfortable anymore. So it should become muscle memory. And what I've also found is that I'm actually a faster developer writing tests than I am not writing them.
Yeah, I am too. I did find, though, when I was first adopting TDD, that it took forever.
It's painful.
Right?
It's
hurt.
not easy. Yeah, it
was
easy.
No fun. But once I got used to it, then it was like, okay.
Yes.
This
is just how you write software.
Yeah. But it guides my thought process. I mean, there are a lot of benefits, but
it's interesting that you said guide your thought process. I know code that I've unit tested better than code that I haven't. Right? Because you understand the nooks and crannies, and you're like scratching your head like, wow, I did not expect that to behave the way that it does. Or it had an interaction with another method that I wrote that I didn't expect. And you really have to know the code to be able to test it at a high level of code coverage. You can't just think you know it. You got to really intimately know that code. So it makes me more comfortable with the code. It makes the code more high quality and more reliable. And it makes me more efficient at my job. And people like that goes against everything I thought about unit testing because historically, it's always slowed me down. It's hard. It's a waste of time. So how do I even get started, Donovan? And I tell them, do not stop what you're doing and go write unit tests for thousands of lines of code that work already.
No.
The next bug you get, right?
Yeah.
The very next bug you get, do yourself a favor and let that be the first unit test you write. Yep. Go fix the bug. Make sure the test passes, check that in, and start building that safety net underneath you. Because if the code works, and it's been working, like you said, 90% of the code that's never going to change is always going to be right. Why am I going to go back and write unit tests for that? It's when it breaks is when you want to go back in and write unit tests for it.
Yep. The other place that I tell people to insert their unit tests, and then I kind of want to get back to talking about Azure DevOps, but the other place I tell people to jump in with that is when you write a new feature, go through the process, write the test, write the code, and then go write unit tests for the other bits of code that you touched.
Right, absolutely.
Because your code is touching other stuff.
For sure.
And that way you can kind of expand your level of comfort around what you're working
Completely
with.
Agree, 100%.
So Azure DevOps, one of the things that I'm wondering about, because we're talking about all these processes, right? And you know, it all kind of plays into this idea of DevOps. But it sounds like Azure DevOps is a very flexible tool.
Absolutely.
And a lot of times what people are looking for is they're looking for a method to do things, right? It's something that guides me through setting up these processes. I mean, in business, I've hired a business coach, right? And it's like, okay, do things this way while I'm figuring it out. Does Azure DevOps give you some of that guided?
There's two options that you can use to kind of hold your hand and get you that my first pipeline kind of experience. Yeah, there's two options, right? One of them is called Azure DevOps Projects. You can go go inside of the Azure portal. You can go to all services and you'll see Azure DevOps Projects.
Right.
You click through a few drop downs, like what language do you want to program in, what resource do you want to deploy to, and it'll give you a modicum pipeline, right? It'll give you one environment. It'll pre-provision the infrastructure, but it gives you an idea of like, okay, I see how this works. There's another open source project called Yo Team that does ask you a few more questions, but gives you a pipeline that you can grow up with. It gives you a best practices written application in either Node.js, Java, .NET Core, or full .NET framework. Like these are like applications that if you were on a Scrum team and it's like, we got to go do a web app, you could use this app as your sprint zero. Look at this, we already have it working. It also creates a Azure DevOps project for you. It creates the repository for you. It populates it with the sample app. It creates the CI pipeline for you and the release pipeline for you using infrastructure as code and deploys the dev, QA, and prod, and even has approvers in between dev and QA and prod. all wired up for you in about 4 minutes.
Oh, wow.
Yes, exactly. So it's called Yo Team. It's completely open source. We take contributions on it all the time, and it's where I tell all of our customers, like, you need to get started and you're unfamiliar, just type Yo Team at your command line and answer the questions and sit back and relax. 4 minutes later, you will literally have code running in Azure. I don't mean 4 minutes later you'll have your pipeline.
Right.
I've timed myself with a stopwatch once. I said, go, and I typed Yo Team. I answered the questions. I committed the code to the repository, and I stopped my clock. Once I actually had the website loaded and I could read it, it was 4 minutes later.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. Unbelievable. So that's what
amazing.
I recommend people to do. Azure DevOps projects are moving towards that way. They have more languages, but I don't believe that the pipeline is as mature. And what we're trying to do is basically slam the two together.
Right.
This episode is sponsored by Sentry.io. Recently, I came across a great tool for tracking and monitoring problems in my apps. Then I asked them if they wanted to sponsor the show and allow me to share my experience with you. Sentry provides a terrific interface for keeping track of what's going on with my app. It also tracks releases so I can tell if what I deployed makes things better or worse. They give you full stack traces and as much information as possible about the situation when the error occurred to help you track down the errors. Plus, one thing I love, you can customize the context provided by Sentry. So, if you're looking for specific information about the request, you can provide it. It automatically scrubs passwords and secure information, and you can customize the scrubbing as well. Finally, it has a user feedback system built in that you can use to get information from your users. Oh, and I also love that they support open source to the point where they actually open source Sentry if you want to self-host it. Use the code DevChat at Sentry.io to get 2 months free on Sentry's small plan. That's code DevChat at Sentry.io.
I'm a little curious. I mean, this is a JavaScript podcast. A lot of people are doing things on front end and back end.
Sure.
So they either have two test suites, one for Angular or React or Vue or something, and one for Node.js on the back end, or whatever other back end language they're using. So how does that all work? I mean,
so you're going to be using something like Mocha or Jasmine or something like that, right? So our test runner doesn't care. Right. So I do a lot of Mocha testing. I'm a big fan of Mocha. I use it for, actually, Yo Team it's written in Node, so it tests itself.
So do you install it through NPM?
I do, and I install it as a
global.
No, I don't. That's just it. I do not. I do not. So I use Istanbul for my code coverage. I use Sign-On for my mocking, and I use Mocha for my test runner, all installed local to my project alone. And then I actually have my test command. So npm test actually drills into my Node modules and runs it locally. So I can now do this on any CI system in the world, hosted or otherwise, because I don't need anything installed globally.
No, I assumed Yo Team was installed.
Sorry, Yo Team. Yeah, so Yo Team you would install globally on your local machine, and that just fires up the pipeline. But Yo Team is not used in your pipeline.
Right.
Good. Yeah, absolutely. So Yo Team, you just install it with npm, and then you're going to install two parts. You're going to install Yo, which is the Yeoman generator engine, and then you're going to install generator-team, which is the part that gets you the Yo Team. And then you just answer the questions, knock yourself out. It's freaking awesome. I've done demos of it at New Zealand and a couple other places. So if you search for Yo Team Donovan, you'll find blog posts, you'll find the repo in GitHub, and even videos of me demoing it on stage, so you can see just how powerful it is. I use it a lot whenever I want to go convince Java devs that Microsoft is here to help. I remember I think it was in South Africa, and I had basically worked my way inside of a Java dev user group, and they were just like, what is this Microsoft guy doing here? They're all like giving me these dark eyes. Like, I promise I'm not going to talk tech. I'm just going to tell you how Microsoft did DevOps so that you can apply this, because this is all theory and stuff. And they're like, all right, fine. So I went for 45 minutes talking about how Microsoft did it, all theory. It's like, all right, I just have one question for you guys. Let's say, for example, that you have absolutely nothing. Your desktop is completely blank. You can use all the open source tools that you want. What I want is a Spring MVC application. I want it to be unit tested using JUnit. I want code coverage calculated with Jacoco. I want you to have a CI system using any CI system you want. I want it deployed into Dev, QA, and Prod into Azure using either Docker or App Service. Knock yourself out. How many hours would it take you to do that? I've gotten anywhere from 4 hours to 8 hours. Actually, one guy said it would take him a week, but I don't know how good he was with Java, right? So it's like, I can do it before lunch. I was like, great. So if you started at 8 a.m., before you went to lunch, you'd have that entire pipeline and code running in Azure. The guy's like, yep, absolutely. I'm like, all right, hold on. And then 4 minutes later, I showed him the code run. He's like, holy, I'm like, yep. Microsoft is here to help. Like, you cannot do this faster than we can.
Well, and that's the whole power of it, right?
Absolutely.
Is why should I even have to think about it?
Exactly.
Right.
Like, so what's interesting is Yo Team was the idea of Scott Guthrie. I was sitting in a meeting with Scott Guthrie, who is our executive vice president, I think, or corporate vice president. I think it's corporate vice president.
You can go watch Microsoft keynotes with Scott Guthrie.
Exactly. So he basically reports to Satya, and he was sitting in a room one day, and people would always joke like, "Damn, I want Donovan in a box, right? I want to be able to go do a Donovan Brown demo without thinking about it, right? How do I do that?" It's like, I'm thinking to myself, you know what? I think we have the technology to do that. He said, I just want to go to a command line and just be done. And that's where basically your team came from. It's like, why haven't we done that? Like, we have the technology, we have the REST APIs, we have the endpoints. Why have we not done this? So I sat down and I wrote this, basically putting Donovan in a box so anyone could do these awesome demos for all these different languages. And it's kind of cool because if I were not in that room and heard him say that, this tool probably still wouldn't exist. But it was kind of neat.
So I guess the other question is, when we're talking about Azure DevOps, like what are the different parts of a process that you can build in or
what are all the
set up?
services that come up? Okay, great. So Azure DevOps is broken into 5 different verticals.
Okay.
The first one is Azure Boards, which is our work item tracking, Kanban boards, task boards. Then we have repos. So we basically have the same functionality that you have in GitHub, but we have it internally. So it's like they're private repos. And we give you actually 2. We give you Git, which is distributed. We have another version called TFVC, which is centralized version control. Some of our customers still need it, so we still support it.
Right.
After that, we have pipelines. Pipelines is probably hands down the most popular. It's the CI/CD. We also have an acquisition of just pipelines from the GitHub Marketplace. So if you're in GitHub and you go to the Marketplace and you go to the continuous integration section or the deployment session, you're going to see Azure Pipelines in there. You can just add it to your actual GitHub repository. We're going to give you 10 concurrent pipelines, unlimited build minutes on Mac OS, Linux, and on Windows.
Oh, wow.
Yes. So I love that you said that because you probably have felt the pain of, I need to have a YAML file to get me to Windows and another YAML file to get me to Mac and to Linux. And now we have one YAML file that runs on all 3 platforms, right? So one YAML file to rule them all.
Yeah, it works on my Mac and works on my Mac. And it also works on the Linux server.
Exactly.
To play
and it also works on your Windows machine. Should you just choose to build on Windows, we give you that as well. So those are the first 3 products. And then the other one we have is test plans, because we're talking about manual testing and associating those test plans to your work items.
Right.
That is part of one of the offerings. And the other one is artifacts. So if you want to have your own private Maven store, NuGet feed, NPM feed, Python just got added, or PowerShell feed, you can actually have that now as part of one of the verticals. So you don't have to go out to public NPM to resolve it, because who knows what versions are out there, or my developer's using some package I don't really trust. Instead, you can now have your own private NPM feed and curate just the versions and the stuff that you trust, and that's where we're actually going to resolve it from. So those are the 5 verticals that are inside of Azure DevOps.
Gotcha. Now, can you resolve those on your developer machine from that private
Absolutely,
setup?
You sure can. So what ends up happening is that, for example, there's a .mpnrc file, I believe is what it is, right? So then in there, you would basically set it up to say, hey, there's my private repository. Here's my authentication against there. And then when you do an npm install, it will read that .mprc file and say, oh, okay, I'm supposed to go over there to resolve it, and it works just great.
Right.
So I use it in my pipeline, because when I'm doing things like YoTeam or we also have a PowerShell module, I have to do it on Mac, Windows, and Linux. And what's really cool is, instead of me publishing out to NPM these beta, alpha, like even pre-alpha bits just to test it, I actually publish them internally to my own feed first, and then I install them from there. Because what I found out the hard way is testing loose files on your hard drive is not the same as testing them once they've been installed from a package. So what I intend to do, and I do this in all my CI packages, is I build the code, test it, static code analysis, unit test it. Then I take that package and I publish it to our internal feed. As part of my release pipeline, I install it from that same private feed. Then I run an integration test against it. And I do that on Mac, Windows, and Linux, knowing that anyone who installs my package on any platform is going to get the same user experience. And then finally, we will publish it to NPM or to the PowerShell gallery or to the actual public NuGet. So it's a nice little DevOps flow for packages as well that allows you to utilize the internal feed for testing and migration and integration testing before you push it out into the public world. So yeah, we have, everything you need. I always describe it as everything that you need to turn an idea into a working piece of software. Yeah, people not included. Someone got mad at me on Twitter and said, what are you talking to say there's no people involved? I'm like, oh my God. So I put a little asterisk on the back of the box that says people not included, right?
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, people required but not included in box.
Well, the whole point is to enable your people.
Yes.
Right? The whole focus is people.
Yeah, we define DevOps as the union of people, process, and products to enable continuous delivery of value to our end users, right?
Yeah.
So yes, we're providing you the products. We've actually guided you through the process, but your people have to get it, right? The people is the hardest part. But value is the most important part, but people is the hardest part.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, I mean, once your people are
on board,
it's
easy.
yeah,
It's easy.
yeah.
It's a beautiful world.
Yep.
For sure.
Absolutely. So let's say that I'm listening to this show.
Sure.
And this sounds wonderful, right?
Right.
I have all these problems. We talked about all your problems, right? And I want to go try this out.
Sure.
And I want to, I want some kind of demo set up so that I can show my boss because, dang boss, life's hard, and this is going to make it easier, right? So how do I show them how it works and get the buy-in that I need so that these problems can start to go away?
All right. So one of the things you can do is you can go to azure.com/DevOps, and that'll be a great landing page for you to get started. If you already have a VSTS account, it's automatically going to turn into dev.azure.com. You can just go to dev.azure.com. We'll show you all your organizations. Now, you asked about how can I get a demo going? What we're going to have to do is put in the show notes. I have a buddy of mine named Sachin who works at Microsoft who actually has a demo builder for you. Like you can simply say, here's my account. Please go create a cool demo in there. And it has walkthroughs of like, this is how you go demo this stuff to go sell people on the idea. Now, so we'll put that in the show notes because I don't have the URL off the top of my head, but we have resources for that.
I have your email.
All right. Absolutely. We'll get that in the show notes for you. Now, what I would do, however, is I would not do a demo to convince my boss that this is cool. We let you start for free. There's no PO you have to go get approved. There's no permission you need to go get. I would just go create an account, and then I would have our team start committing code to there and set up a CI build, and let the CI build be the proof. Don't try to convince them with with PowerPoint. Don't try to convince them with words and charts. Just go do the right thing. It's your job to write software, and you know better than your boss knows that for me to be efficient, I need to be doing these things. This tool provides those for me, and it doesn't cost me a dime to get started. So why do you need to go convince anyone to not spend money? That's what I'm like. How do I need to go convince you to not spend money and make me more efficient at my job? If you have to go convince your boss of that, you need to go get a new boss, right? Because that's just ridiculous to me. That's why I hired you, was to go write software in the most efficient way possible. And if these tools are the way they go do that, then you need to go be using those tools already. Don't waste time trying to convince me to go do your job.
Right.
But if you need them, we do have a demo generator.
I was going to say, because, I may not be able to get my team to start committing to it right away.
Well, the funny thing is that right now, let's say, for example, you're on a team. Your team's using source control, I hope.
Oh, that's true.
All right. So if
probably GitHub.
All right. Fair enough. Perfect. So let's assume that you're on a team of 5 developers who love using GitHub, but think continuous integration is the stupidest thing on earth, a complete waste of time. How many of them do you have to convince to go set up continuous integration on your GitHub repo? Zero. Exactly. Because they're going to keep committing to the GitHub repository. They don't know that a CI system is running. Don't need to know that a CI system is running. But I have set one up because I'm tired of coming into work and Donovan's broken the build again. Because we've all been there. Exactly. We've all been there where you come into work, you pull the latest code, and you try to compile it, and it does not freaking compile because he forgot to check in a reference or he didn't update the package.json, so I didn't download the necessary packages, but it's on his machine because he installed it local but didn't do the save.
Or didn't account for time zones. I have a story about that.
Exactly, right? So it's broken, but now we're all broken.
Yeah.
And we have to sit here and wait for Donovan to fix the build. However, if you had installed a CI system just for yourself, while the rest of us are sitting around the water cooler bitching about Donovan, and you're working, we're like, where the hell is James? Why isn't he here? Where's John? Why are they working? Like, how did you do that? Oh yeah, I didn't pull the latest code because the CI system told me it was broke. A what system? I have a continuous integration system. Every time someone checks in code, it builds it and tells me if it's good or not. Can I get on that? Yeah, absolutely. You can register here to get notifications. So I didn't have to convince them that CI was good. Eventually, CI will convince them that it's good because I'm the only person in that working while you are sitting over there waiting for Donovan to fix the build. Right. So that's what I would do. I wouldn't go try to convince people. I wouldn't go try to convince my team. If they're already checking into source control and you don't have CI, just go install CI for yourself. Right. And then let the results, the reports, all that stuff speak for themselves.
And you did mention that Azure Pipelines is just a click away in GitHub.
So just go to the GitHub Marketplace. You can search. You can find it under the continuous integration section and under the deployment section because we offer CI and CD, not just one or the other.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I would do.
So one other question that I have, and this is something that I'm sure people are going to get worried a little bit about. So you get started for free. At what point do you start saying, okay, you got to start paying for it?
Good question. So right now, you can get 5 you and 4 of your team members on there for absolutely no money, right?
Okay.
And so it's that 6th person. That is when we take you to the cleaners and we make all of our money back. No, I think at worst case, I think it's like $6 a month or $9 a month. It's cheaper than Spotify.
Just for that first person?
No, for every person. Yeah, every person after that, I think it's like $6 a month.
Okay.
Now, if you happen to be in a shop that does both Microsoft development and other types of development, and you have an MSDN assigned to you, then you never count against the 5 people.
Right.
So everyone who has an MSDN is already licensed for Azure DevOps.
Gotcha.
It's kind of cool. So then you can add 5 non-MSDN users to your account before you have to start paying for that 6th person. So you can go everyone listening to my voice right now can go get 4 of their buddies and create a startup and have all these powerful tools for $0 and 0 cents. Right? And then once you're big enough to where you need to hire more people, you probably can afford the $6 a month, right, for us to start adding those 6th person for you.
I think you might have just saved me a little bit of time. I have a GitLab set up.
Okay.
Because I didn't want to pay for private repositories on GitHub.
Yep.
And a few other reasons.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, if this is free,
it is.
Right?
It is, and you will get unlimited private repos for free. You will get integration into GitHub like no one else is going to be able to be. Now that we're acquiring GitHub, we're not ever going to make GitHub Microsoft.
Yeah.
We need GitHub to stay GitHub. GitHub is important as it is.
Right.
But what we're going to be able to do is integrate better than we've ever integrated before, right? Because we now can have our 2 organizations work closely together to make sure the best experience you're ever going to have is using Azure DevOps with GitHub.
Yep.
So yeah, I just don't know why you would not use either GitHub or Azure DevOps for your repositories. I just don't understand. Like, you could not justify that to me.
Right. How easy is it to migrate away from it? Because that's the other thing is people get worried about vendor lock-in.
It's GitHub. I mean, it's Git. Like, you know how hard it is? It's like add remote, push to the remote, done, I'm gone, right? That's hard. That's how hard it is to get away.
No, it's true. I guess people are worried about losing the data on their CI or things like that, but...
No, though the data on their CI is obviously going to be stored there. I don't believe there's a way that we can export all the history of your build results, right? Now, you could probably go comb that information because it's there. And there, like I said, there's a PowerShell module. There's also a CLI for Azure DevOps. If you really wanted to go and scrape that before you left and say, hey, run a report that shows me all of my build statuses over the 4 years and put it in an Excel spreadsheet, knock yourself out. Yeah. But I don't know of any CI system that lets you export the
I don't
history,
think any of them do.
Yeah,
no.
So you could get it if you really wanted it. Don't know why you'd care.
Yeah.
Right? You know what I mean? On that
No, it's true.
Yeah.
Especially since I really mostly only care about the current
source
build.
code. Exactly. Yeah, you only care about the source code and the current build that's running currently inside of your production. That should still be labeled with a tag in your source code. So even when you push that to a new remote, you know what's running in production. You can use it to make a branch and do a hotfix or something like that.
Because all of the reference stuff is all on your machine.
Exactly. That's the beauty of GitHub. So when people are like, well, how do I get off vendor lock? And I'm like, are you joking? You do understand how Git works, right? The whole point is that you all have a copy of everything, right? So that's the beauty of it.
Good deal.
For sure. Yeah, so getting off of it wouldn't be difficult. I don't know why you would get off of it. Once you get, it's like a drug. It's like so good. You're like, this is awesome. How did I ever live without this? I would never leave it. Even if I didn't work at Microsoft, and even before I worked at Microsoft. So I was using TFS before I worked at Microsoft. Now that I work here and it's gotten so much better, I don't care what company I go to, I'm going to be trying to use VSTS or Azure DevOps at that company, even if it's a competitor. It's like, no, this is the best system out there.
Right.
Absolutely.
So the other question I have is continuous deployment.
Sure.
And I know I'm talking to somebody else about Azure pipelines later today.
Okay.
But I'm a little bit curious just, for people who are listening and getting a feel for this. Obviously, it works with Azure, right? If I'm deploying to Azure, it just,
Yep.
Azure DevOps, Azure Cloud, it better work, right? Yeah. But a lot of times I'm deploying to like a virtual private server or an actual, metal server in a data center or something like that.
Or a mobile device or IoT or AWS. You can say AWS. It's okay. GCP. We understand that people have a multi-cloud scenario. So you'll hear me, Abel Wang, and a lot of people from my team, when we talk about Azure DevOps, we say any language, any platform.
Right.
When we say any platform, I don't just mean Mac OS, Windows, or Linux. I'm talking mobile devices, IoT, AWS, GCP, Azure, on-prem. I'm talking about every platform.
Right.
So we have ways to get you to every platform. We bought a hockey app, 4 years ago now maybe, and hockey app gets us the distribution that we need to mobile devices, which is now mapped into App Center.
Yeah, we did an episode on that for iFreaks.
Perfect.
It's the first build we were invited to. So,
Awesome. Yeah. Great. So we have the technology to get you to mobile devices. We have the technology to get you to Raspberry Pis and IoT devices. We have the inside of the Azure DevOps Marketplace is an extension written by AWS. So anything inside of AWS you want to get to, there's a task already in our library that will get you to those resources.
Right.
GCP needs to catch up, right? I don't think there's a GCP one in there. However, it doesn't mean that you can't deploy to GCP, because anything that you can do from a command line, and it sounds like I'm blowing smoke, but it's God honest truth. Anything that you can do from a command line, you can do from our build and our release system.
Okay.
So what we have is we have a task that runs PowerShell on any platform that supports PowerShell. And for those who don't know, PowerShell is actually supported on Windows, Linux, and Mac OS. So if you love PowerShell, you don't have to abandon it and go to Bash just to get to Linux and Mac. Maybe you're really good at Bash. We have a task that runs Bash on Linux and Mac. And we have another cool little arbitrary command tool that will literally run any command you give it on any platform you point it at perfectly. So if the tool happens to exist and you know the command line to call it, and GCP has a CLI that you can use to deploy to it, you just call that CLI from our build or release, and we'll deploy anywhere that you want.
Gotcha.
So when we say any language, any platform, we're not bluffing. That's not marketing speak. We've proven it time and time again. Anything you can do from a command line, we can do, including deploying to our competitors. That also can be extended to anything that you can do from a REST API, because from PowerShell, you can call any REST API you want. Same thing what you can do with what is that tool that everyone is using? Damn it, I just lost it. But it works on Mac, Windows, and Linux as well to do API calls. What the hell? What am I thinking? I can't remember the name of that stupid tool is.
I'm not sure which one you're talking about.
Yeah, there's a tool. There's a command line tool that you can use to call any REST API you want. And it just escaped me, but we'll put it in the show notes too if I remember what it is. But the cool thing is that means that now I can call any REST API I want from our build or our release system as well. And it's going to drive me nuts that I can't remember what that thing is called. But yeah, there's a tool that you can use to do that from any platform.
Right.
So now our tool set is anything you can do from a REST API, anything you can do from a command line, you can now do from our build and from our release system. So like anywhere. So hopefully that answers your question on like where can I deploy? Anywhere. On-prem, behind your firewall, on bare metal, on virtual machines, whatever you want.
Awesome.
Yep,
Very cool.
It is. I love it. I love my job because what I get to work on is some of the coolest tech, and it helps every developer, no matter what language they program in. It's awesome.
Yep. Now, one last question that I have. It's interesting because my answer, I'm curious what your answer is.
Okay.
What do you think the biggest mistake people are making with their processes, people, and products?
They're trying to do it all at once.
Okay.
What I mean by that is they'll see me on stage or they'll see this really cool DevOps talk and they're all excited and they go back to the work. And mistake number one is they try to convince the other people that it's a good idea, that weren't at that conference, that didn't get all the context, and they just want to keep doing it the same way as ever. So I go back to just do the CI yourself, let the rest of it grow from there. Don't say, okay, we're all in on DevOps. Let's stop what we're doing for the next 3 months. Let's don't do any, and let's just go figure this thing out, right? Let's go do the grand plan of what our entire pipeline is going to look like. You've never done this before. Whatever you draw is going to be wrong because you're working off of assumptions, and your world is different than what you saw at that conference, right? So don't go off and try to do the grand scheme of things. What I tell people to do is focus on the one thing that hurts the most. And just fix that one little thing. And trust me, if you're sitting in an organization that does not have continuous integration, that's probably the thing that hurts the most.
Probably.
Right? Yes, so go fix that. Right? Go get
Well, it's also one of the
integration.
easiest things to fix.
It's instant value.
Yeah.
It is literally instant value with no risk whatsoever. There is literally no risk to building your code more often. Zero risk, right? So it is like the no-brainer first step is go set up continuous integration. There's too many free tools and free options. Takes 15 minutes at most, right? Even if you have to figure it out to set this up, and you get instant value from it.
Right.
And then at that point, you're like, okay, now that we have a continuous build and we have these great packages or zip files or WAR files or whatever it is that we have that's an artifact, let's go and try to deploy it. And I bet you it's going to be manual, and that's going to hurt. All right, then let's go look at that next, right? But don't dream up what you think your pipeline should look like having never done it before. Just go get continuous integration in place. Great. Do we have any unit testing running in our continuous integration? Nope. Well, hell, let's go put some continuous integration. Because what's hurting us, yes, our deployment is manual, but it's the quality of what we're deploying that hurts us the most, right? Because
absolutely.
Yeah, we've had bash scripts or we have PowerShell that kind of automates our deployment, semi-automates it, but that's not what hurts the most. What hurts the most is every time we push it, it's buggy. So let's put unit tests in our pipeline. Let's figure out the automation. And now we have high quality code. we need to ship it faster than we do right now. That
Yep.
PowerShell script's not cutting it anymore. Let's add that to our pipeline as part of a continuous deployment
Right.
pipeline as well. Now, all of a sudden, we're deploying it faster. But, man, are we delivering value? I think we are. Maybe we should add monitoring to this to make sure we monitor the code while it's running in production and
Right.
see if our product backlog is in the right priority, because we're just guessing that the priorities is right. So that's
Yeah.
what hurts most, is that we don't know if we're delivering value. So you add monitoring there, right? So now all of a sudden you have this cool pipeline where a developer checks in code, it automatically gets built, it automatically gets tested, it automatically gets deployed, and monitoring starts immediately.
Right.
Not now what hurts. Just take a look at your landscape right now.
Yep.
What hurts the most, and let's go fix that. And it's an iterative process. It's not a big bang, stop what you're doing, rip and replace all your tools. It's a, in your pipeline that you have today, what hurts the most, and let's go fix that. So the biggest mistake is trying to convince others and trying to do it all at once.
Yep.
What was your answer?
My answer was thinking that you don't have time.
True, which they believe
so
because
people
they want to do
don't
it all
start.
at once.
Yeah.
Because they think they have to
Yeah.
stop what they're doing and do it all at once. But if you realize that I only have to do this one problem and it's only going to take me 15, 20 minutes a day, let's say you don't even get it right the first day.
Right.
Day one, you spend 15 minutes investigating all the CI systems out there, right? And you have an idea on day two which one you're going to go play with, right? So you go and you create a free trial on day two of Azure DevOps, for example,
Right.
and you get this cool Hello World CI system going, but it's not yours. And the next day, I bet you get it.
Yeah.
Right? I bet you the next day, 3 days in, 45 minutes in, across 3 days, you have a CI system running now that'll run forever, right?
Yep.
So that's the kind of way I'd want you to invest. So I agree with you. People don't think they have the time because they think they have to do it all at once,
Right.
and that's the big mistake. So we kind of said the same thing, but in a different way around.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of reasons why people don't start. And I
Sure.
would dare say that most teams don't have any form of this.
Oh, for sure.
And-
It's shocking. I always ask, please be honest. I asked it yesterday in my session. Please be honest. How many of you work on a dev team without CI? More hands raised than they
Oh, I'm
should have
sure.
had. Right?
Oh, yeah.
It's just like, can't believe it's 2018 and you don't have CI. Right.
Yeah.
And I told everyone that raised their hand, I said, Monday when you get back to work, just install it. Like, don't ask, don't try to convince them, just install it.
Yep.
Like, and so the next time I ask this question, you better not raise your hand again, right? You know, just go do the right thing.
Well, and again, I mean, so my last full-time job before I, went independent was freelancing. Yeah, I set up CI for my team.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, after a month of us getting warned right, before because we did the big release deploys every month,
Sure.
which usually meant that somebody was up all night, usually a couple of somebodies, which
Yep.
sucks.
Yep.
Get continuous deployment, folks.
Yes.
That's pain. That's pain that Donovan's talking about, right?
Yes.
About a month or two after that, we had a monitor up on our screen, and all it was red or green. Yeah. I mean, that was it, right?
That's progress, man. It's like step by step. But
And,
I remember
and
those
it was basically, I mean, it was, hey, this hurts, and now we know we're either going to avoid pain or we're going to have pain.
Yep. And what I've also noticed is that if something hurts, do it more often, not less.
Yeah.
Because if you, I've known a lot of companies man, every time we do a deployment, it's all hands on deck. We're all up in the middle of the night. We're all drinking coffee, trying to stay awake, fighting fires, trying to install this stuff. Man, that is so painful. We should only do that once or twice a year because we hate it so much. And what they don't realize is that you're going to hate it forever because you only do it once or twice a year.
Yeah.
So the volume of changes going into each deployment is 6 months worth. So when something breaks, which change over the last 6 months did we need to go troubleshoot?
Right.
But if you only made one change and you deployed it, and something went bad, guess what? It's the change that you just made. It's easy for you to diagnose. It's easy for you to fix. And even
roll back.
Exactly. If that's the case, if that's the path that you take. And the thing is that if it's painful to deploy and you have to do it every day, you're going to automate and fix that. But if you only have to do it every 6 months, it sucks that every 6 months, but I'm not going to waste time automating something that we only do twice a year.
Right.
You'd automate the hell out of it if you did it every day or every 3 weeks. So if it hurts, do it more often, and it's going to motivate you to automate it.
Yep, absolutely. So do you want to just remind people again where they can go check out Azure DevOps?
Yeah, so go to azure.com/DevOps is a great getting started. If you already have a VSTS account, you can either go to dev.azure.com or still use the old name, visualstudio.com. It'll still take you to the same place. If you need help on anything Azure DevOps, we obviously have a Twitter handle at Azure DevOps on Twitter. We're very active there. My team, the league, has a hashtag. It's the hashtag LOECDA. If you use it, it's literally like a bat signal. All 5 of us will go and read your tweet, and we will either answer you blog and answer or engage the people at Microsoft that can answer you as well. And I'm at Donovan Brown on Twitter. It is the #1 way to get a hold of me.
Awesome.
This episode is brought to you by TripleByte. Applying to programming jobs sucks. You have to put the right keywords in your resume. You spend hours and hours on the phone screens and take-home projects, and that's assuming the company even responds to your application. Well, if you're a software engineer, TripleByte can help. They work with over 400 top tech companies, from big names like Dropbox and Adobe to exciting startups. You do one brief online interview with them, and if you do well, you go straight to final interviews with the company on their platform. It's like the Common App for software developers. TripleByte does not look at your resume or where you went to school. All they care about is if you can code. I've helped dozens of software developers with various credentials get jobs, and this looks like a terrific way for you to get in and get interviewed and get a job without a lot of the hassle and overhead. You can go check them out at triplebyte.com/react. That's triplebyte.com, byte as in 8 bits. As a special offer for listeners of this show, if you take a job through TripleByte, they'll offer you a $1,000 signing bonus.
So the last thing we do on the show is picks.
Sure.
You've been on the shows before.
Yep.
Do you have some things you want to shout out about?
What was I? There was something. I would actually encourage everyone. We talked about Yo Team. If you haven't seen that yet, I would highly encourage you to go look at that. If you are a PowerShell fan and you like Azure DevOps, go look at the VS Team PowerShell module. We just broke 100,000 downloads.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we're
Congrats.
really proud. Yeah, thank you. Very proud of that. We have 17 active contributors on the GitHub repo. We're happily taking contributions there, and it has become... It was funny because I remember when my manager, first started writing it, he's like, yeah, if you're passionate about it, go ahead. But he didn't really see the point of it. And then the last time I spoke to him, like, dude, we're over 36,000 downloads. He's like, what? And now we're over 100,000 downloads. I'm
Nice.
like, yeah, I saw something that other people just didn't see, that we want to automate all the DevOps stuff. We even want to automate the creation of our automation, right?
Oh,
and that's
yeah.
exactly what it does. So those would be my 2 picks, Yo Team and the VS Team PowerShell module.
Awesome. I'm going to throw in a few picks. Flying down here was my first time flying on JetBlue,
Okay.
and it was a pretty good experience.
Cool.
I usually fly Delta.
Okay.
Delta costs a little bit more. It's a little bit nicer experience, I guess.
Okay.
But yeah.
For the cost, it was worth it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a United guy because I live in Houston, so they're
Yeah.
my hub.
Yeah, same with Salt Lake.
Gotcha. Cool
Yep.
deal.
So I'm going to shout out about them. And then one other thing that I'm going to shout out about, if you're looking to start a podcast, I've been working on an application that will help you automate DevOps, I guess,
cool.
for podcasts.
Awesome.
So I'm looking for beta testers. So if people are out there and you're interested in starting a podcast, let me know, and we'll get you in.
Private preview.
That's right.
Awesome. Very cool.
It's a little bit rough, but
Hey, man.
it's saving me a ton of time already. So.
Awesome. That's cool. That's good to hear. Well, thanks for having me again, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.